I've come across a lot of stories about break-ins, but the ones that stick with me the most are the ones where the people inside weren't just robbed, they were hunted. These aren't just stories of thieves looking for money. These are the disturbing accounts of people who realized too late that the intruder wasn't just after their belongings. They were after them. The first story happened to a girl named Alyssa when she was 19. She lived with her parents in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked at night. But Alyssa's parents were away for the weekend, leaving her alone in the house for the first time. She wasn't worried at all. In fact, she was excited to have the place to herself. The first night was uneventful. She stayed up late watching Netflix in the living room, scrolling on her phone, and eventually falling asleep on the couch. But around 3 in the morning, she woke up suddenly to a sound that made her blood run cold. It wasn't a creak of the house settling. It was the sound of the back door slowly opening. At first, she thought maybe it was her parents coming home early. But she remembered they had texted her hours earlier, saying they wouldn't be back until Sunday night. She froze, her body tense, listening. She could hear faint footsteps on the tile floor of the kitchen. Someone was inside. Alyssa slid off the couch as quietly as possible and crouched low, her heart pounding so hard she was afraid whoever it was would hear it. She grabbed her phone, but the battery had died sometime during the night. The footsteps grew closer. She could see the faint shadow of movement against the wall, just out of sight of the living room doorway. Whoever it was wasn't rushing. They were moving slowly, carefully, like they didn't want to be heard. That was when it clicked in Alyssa's mind. This wasn't a robbery. This person knew someone was home. She crawled toward the staircase, moving as silently as she could. The house was pitch black except for the soft glow of the TV screen she had left on. When she placed her foot on the first step, it creaked louder than she could have imagined. She froze, holding her breath. The footsteps stopped. For a few long seconds, there was complete silence. Then she heard it, the faintest sound of breathing, coming from just around the corner. Alyssa bolted up the stairs, her bare feet slapping against the wood as she ran to her room. She slammed the door shut and turned the lock, backing away, her eyes darting to the window. That's when she heard the intruder sprinting up the stairs after her. Her entire body went cold. She pulled her desk chair to the door, wedging it under the knob just as the handle rattled violently. "Open up," a man's voice hissed, low and raspy. She covered her mouth with both hands to stop herself from screaming. The man started pounding on the door, harder and harder, until she thought the wood would splinter. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Alyssa stared at the door, listening, so hard her ears rang. She thought she heard him moving down the hall, but she couldn't be sure. Minutes passed, maybe hours. She didn't move from that spot, her body trembling, until daylight began to seep through the blinds. When she finally gathered the courage to open her door, she found muddy footprints on the hallway carpet, leading from her parents' bedroom back down the stairs. Their room had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, clothes scattered everywhere. But the strangest thing was that nothing valuable was missing. Not the jewelry, not the cash her parents had left on the dresser. Everything was still there. The police came later that morning after she ran to a neighbor's house to call them. They searched the house but found no sign of forced entry. The back door lock was intact. The only explanation was that Alyssa had forgotten to lock the door before falling asleep that night. But what stayed with her wasn't the fact that a man had broken in. It was what the police found under her bed. Small folding knife. The intruder hadn't been looking for money. He had come for her. The second story comes from a man named Eric. He was in his late 20s when this happened, living alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of an older building. It wasn't in a dangerous neighborhood, but it wasn't exactly safe either. The kind of place where people kept to themselves and didn't ask questions. It was a Tuesday night around midnight when Eric was woken up by a soft but distinct tapping sound. At first he thought it was part of a dream, but when he opened his eyes, he realized it was coming from his bedroom window. That didn't make sense. His window was on the second floor, overlooking a narrow alleyway. There was no ledge or balcony. Outside, no fire escape. Nobody could be standing there. He lay still, staring at the curtains that covered the window. The tapping came again. A slow, deliberate tap, 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 like someone was using a fingernail. Eric felt his throat tighten. He told himself it was probably a branch scraping against the glass. Maybe the wind had shifted. That thought comforted him just enough to close his eyes again. But then he heard it, a low, muffled laugh, right outside his window. He sat up instantly, his chest tight, his heart racing. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by his bed and yanked the curtain open. The window was empty. Nothing but the quiet alleyway below. He opened the window and leaned out, staring down into the shadows, but the alley was deserted. Not even a cat or a rat moved. Shaken, he closed the window and locked it. He tried to go back to sleep, but it took him hours. The next night, the tapping came again. Same time, same window. Tap, tap, tap. He froze, wide awake, gripping the bat. He didn't open the curtain this time. He just sat in the dark, listening. The laugh came again, louder this time. This became a pattern. Every night around midnight, the tapping would start. Some nights it lasted a few minutes. Other nights it went on for hours. Sometimes the laugh followed. Sometimes it didn't. Eric started to dread nightfall. He taped over the window with cardboard, thinking maybe if he couldn't see it, it would stop. But it didn't. He moved his bed into the living room, but the sound still came, faint and far away, like it was reaching him no matter where he went. He stopped sleeping. He stopped going to work. His neighbors noticed he looked pale and exhausted, but when they asked, he just shook his head. One evening, desperate, he called his friend Daniel to come stay over. Daniel laughed it off when Eric told him about the tapping. "Man, you're just spooking yourself," he said. They stayed up late drinking beers, waiting. Midnight came and went. Nothing happened. Eric started to feel foolish, like maybe his exhaustion had made him hallucinate the whole thing. But then, just after 1 in the morning, it came. Tap, tap, tap. Daniel froze, his face draining of color. "You heard that, right?" Eric whispered. The tapping grew faster, more aggressive, rattling the glass. Then the laugh came, not muffled this time, but clear and sharp, like someone was pressed right up against the window. Daniel stood, his hands shaking. "There's no way. You're on the second floor." He pulled the curtain aside, and for a split second, both of them saw it. A face, pale, wide-eyed, pressed against the glass. The smile stretched too far, the teeth too sharp. Then it was gone. Daniel staggered back, dropping his beer. "We're leaving," he said firmly, grabbing his keys. They left the apartment that night and stayed at Daniel's place across town. Eric never went back to that apartment again. He broke his lease, packed his things during the day, and moved in with a relative. But the worst part. 2 weeks later, Daniel called him in the middle of the night. He had just moved into a new place, himself, and he swore he heard tapping on his bedroom window. The last story happened to a woman named Claire. She was in her mid-30s, a single mom living with her 8-year-old son in a small house outside of town. Money was tight, but she had managed to buy a fixer-upper, and she was proud of making it a home. Claire worked late shifts at a diner, usually getting home around midnight. Her son Jacob would stay with her sister on those nights, so the house was often empty until she came back. One night, she pulled into her driveway and immediately felt something was off. The house looked normal enough from the outside, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. When she stepped inside, the air felt colder than usual. She chalked it up to the night air and locked the door behind her. She went through her routine, dropping her purse on the counter, hanging up her jacket, and turning on the kitchen light. That's when she noticed something strange. A chair was pulled out from the dining table, not far, just a few inches, but she knew she hadn't left it that way. Claire was meticulous about keeping things in order, and she always tucked the chairs back in. Her stomach twisted. She tried to tell herself maybe Jacob had left it like that earlier, but she knew deep down he hadn't. She walked through the house slowly, checking each room. Everything seemed fine, until she reached her bedroom. Her jewelry box was open. Nothing was missing. But the lid was up, and she knew for a fact she had closed it before leaving. Claire's first instinct was to grab the phone and call the police. But then she hesitated. What would she even say? Nothing was broken into, nothing was stolen, just small details out of place. Maybe she was overtired, maybe she was imagining it. So she convinced herself to let it go. She locked her bedroom door that night and tried to sleep. The next morning she woke up to find the front door unlocked. From that point on, the incidents grew stranger. She would find kitchen drawers open when she was sure she had closed them. A glass sitting on the counter that she hadn't used. One time the shower curtain was drawn shut, though she always left it open. And then came the night she heard footsteps. It was past midnight. She was lying in bed, scrolling on her phone when she heard it. The sound of heavy, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. Her heart jumped into her throat. She reached over and turned off her lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The footsteps grew louder, closer, stopping right outside her door. The doorknob turned. She had locked it, thank God. But whoever was on the other side twisted it hard, jiggling it, testing it. Then, silence. Claire didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning she called her brother, who came over immediately. Together, they searched every inch of the house. That's when they found it, in the attic. Behind an old stack of boxes, they discovered a sleeping bag, a few food wrappers, and a nearly empty bottle of water. Someone had been living in her house. The police were called, but whoever it was had vanished. They couldn't find any fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. The theory was that the intruder had slipped in one day when Claire or her son had left the door unlocked and had been staying in the attic ever since, coming out at night to roam the house. Claire moved out within a week. She never spent another night in that house. But the part that still chills her to this day was what the police found on the back of her bedroom door. Scratched faintly into the wood, almost hidden, were 3 words. I watched you. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories.